Hello, good afternoon. Okay, well, most of you have no idea who I am, but still you're here, so you're here voluntarily, I guess. You could choose from a lot of things. You thought, oh, let's go there. How to unlock my true potential. I have no idea what that means, but we can make the best of it. Well, I'm Dutch, of course, I'm Dutch, and I live near Amsterdam, and I never had a job in my entire life. So I never received salary, ever, which is interesting, and I never studied anything, so you might say that I'm an amateur. And we live nowadays in a funny world, because if you're an amateur for more than 30 years, you become a professional amateur. And then you get to write books, to tell stories, and to explain to people how you can develop yourself if you never are constrained by any type of organization. Because I was lucky. But before we start, we have to get to know each other a little bit. So I'm wondering, who of you is spending more than 3 hours a day on a computer? Okay, there you go, knowledge workers. And how many people here are actually spending more than 6 hours on a computer on a daily basis? Ooh. So you might think that you're in the financial sector, but you're a knowledge worker. And I discovered something very interesting last half year. We have no clue whatsoever knowledge work actually is. Maybe you've been reading up about this fourth industrial revolution. The times are changing, we have disruption everywhere. But it doesn't make any sense to dive into topics like this if you don't begin to think with what actually is knowledge work, because we now live in a knowledge age, in a knowledge economy with a lot of knowledge work. And you heard a lot about stories about information overload, burnout, stress, stuff like that. So I think we have to redefine what work actually is, or start to begin what is work. Because, just a quick checkup, who of you here in the audience is far more productive and energetic and creative at 8 o'clock in the evening compared with 8 o'clock in the morning? So who's more creative in the evening? That's interesting. And since you're finance guys, I think you have to pay attention extra right now. Because, as far as I know, in most of the organizations, the cost for people, personnel costs, are the biggest cost. Yeah, right? So 1/3 of the people is at best in the evening. What on earth are they doing showing up at work in the morning? Actually, you're spending 1/3 of your biggest cost component in the least effective way. Those people cause the traffic jams. If you take 1/3 out of the cars of all the traffic jams, there are no traffic jams. But this is just a tiny example. I hear a lot about change nowadays. We have to change. We need change management program. We have to get fit for the future as an organization. But there's something wrong, I think, with change. Who here in the audience really, really loves change? Please teach me how. I'm a bit autistic, and I'm fully aware of that. It has a lot of benefits, by the way. I am not really into change. And actually, I don't believe that most of the people like change. We are genetically engineered not to change. Every time that you do things by routine, it costs 8 times less biochemical energy in your brain than when you do something that is stress-related or is related to something new, especially when other people tell you that you should change something. That doesn't work. So we have to get rid of this word change. I'm curious. Are there any people here who made New Year's resolutions in the beginning of the year? Yeah? Okay, and who committed him or herself to being more active and go to the gym? Yeah? And who really succeeded in doing that? Only a few. So, but you have a lot of willpower. This is why you're at the front row. Welcome. I discovered something interesting in last December. I was reading in a book on micro habits. And is there anybody here in the audience familiar with that phrase, micro habits? No, it's rare. I thought I was the last one who discovered it, but actually I might be one of the first. So I was reading this book on micro habits, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I read in this book that from a brain perspective, biochemical brain and energy depletion, most of the people don't want to change anything because it costs too much energy. And you make a new resolution and you think, okay, I'm going to really do that. And as soon as you have a hangover or something happens, you immediately will find an excuse not to do it. We people are expert in finding an excuse not to do something when it costs a lot of energy. So I was reading into this book, and the whole concept was you have to bring the thing that you want to change back to the minimal effective dose. If you don't brush your teeth for a few days, well, it gets smelly and dirty. But if you keep not brushing your teeth over a year, you get in trouble. So this is something that is very small and tiny, but if you neglect it, you get in trouble. But it also works the other way around. So actually, you can change something by adding a little bit of stuff to it and then increase it. So, and then I found something extra interesting in the book. The book said you cannot change more than 4 habits at the same time. And I thought, okay, let's see about that. So I wrote down 80 things that I wanted to change in my life. From health perspective, spending more time with the kids, finance, all kinds of stuff. And then they said, okay, you cannot do that because within a few days this system won't work. And I decided to do more push-ups every day. But here's the trick. On my list of doing push-ups, every morning, as soon as I wake up, it says on my list, do 1 push-up. Because there is no excuse at all not to do 1 push-up. And here's the thing. If you're already in this position in the morning, and you do 1 push-up, yeah, you're there anyway. So, right now, I do 70 a day. So I started with this thing in December last year, and now we have October. I managed to do 95% of all the things on my list that really improve over time. And that's interesting. So you're here to unlock your true potential. This is far more a secret for changing stuff than most of the people are aware of. So whatever you want to improve, find the minimum effective dose that you can keep up with without using an excuse not to do it. And there's absolutely no excuse at all for not trying to do 1 push-up. So on my list daily is not do 70 push-ups, no, it only says 1. Because then I cannot find an excuse not to do it. So this is how I think about change, time over time. It's funny that people who are in a management kind of position, in a leadership position, in an HR position, we work with a lot of people, but we're not really aware of how we can get more out of the people, more fun, more energy, more potential. And somehow we don't invest in stuff like this enough altogether. But one of the weirdest things I've been fascinated about for years is the absolute lack of digital skills, focus on digital skills with leaders. So it doesn't really matter if you can do a very expensive MBA study or a post-academic study or a leadership course, but it doesn't really make sense if you still spend 3, 5, 6 hours a day using your computer as a modern typewriter. Because actually most of the people use the computer as a modern typewriter. There's absolutely no focus at all on digital skills in most of the organizations. And therefore you waste valuable time from your people on this planet. Who of you is using Outlook for more than 2 hours a day? Yeah, or another email client. And who of those people actually checks out websites and weblogs with tips once a month on how to work smarter with Outlook? This is the modern equivalent of trying to cut down a tree with an axe and forgetting to sharpen the axe. Because you have to sharpen your axe every now and then, otherwise you cannot cut the tree. And, well, with digital skills it's the same. And somehow we neglect that part. But you're here also for guerrilla tips, I guess. And who of you reads books when you want to learn something new? Who reads more than 10 books a year? Oh, that's cool. The best quote when it comes to unlocking your potential I've ever heard is the difference between where you are now and in 5 years depends on the quality of books you've read. So if you want to improve anything in your life, start with reading books. That's the easy way. Just read books. A book is a good deal. For a small amount of money, you tap into thousands hours of research, pain, experience, mistakes. And if you do it with 100 books, well, you get more knowledgeable, and you can advise more people because your world expands. You know more stuff, you know more words, you know more concepts, and suddenly you're on stage somewhere. But there's a trick, because we are all very busy and don't have enough time to read all the books. And there's a fun way to read books, and that's not to read them. In my experience, if somebody writes a book for 3 years, with a lot of effort, writers of books love to talk about the topics that are in the books. Otherwise, they wouldn't invest 3 years of their time and life in making a book. So if you just push their passion button, talk about your book, they will start to talk. So what I learned years ago, if you get the opportunity to choose between reading a book, of reaching out to the writer of the book, sending out an email of say hi on LinkedIn or Twitter, hi, great book. I would really like to have a cup of coffee with you to talk about the book. My experience is that 9 out of 10 people who write books love to talk about a book with people who are reading the book. Saves you a lot of time reading. So if you reach out and you say to those people, hi, I'm not in a hurry, but I really admire your work. Never lie. It has to be sincere. I really admire your work. You don't have to say that you didn't read the book. I really admire your work. And I would love to have 1 cup of coffee with you somewhere in the upcoming 3 months at a location at your choice. Well, in the Dutch culture, where I come from, having a cup of coffee is the least threatening thing that you can do with somebody. It's just a cup of coffee and then you can step away. And then the fun starts. 9 out of 10 writers will say yes. And then you can ask them about the book. So you don't have to read it. Big life hack. Saves a lot of time. But there's extra layers of advantages in this situation, because if you read a book, you cannot ask questions. Well, you can, but you don't get answers. And if you're with the guy who wrote the book, you can just ask anything, and most of the time they will give feedback and answer. But in my experience, everybody that prints a book is already busy with a new book. And yeah, while you're there, you can also talk about a new book. And then you know more than the rest because they didn't talk to the guy. And if there's a little bit of chemistry, they might give you a signature in their free copy of the book, so you don't have to buy the book. And when there's even more chemistry, they might want to share the manuscript of the new book before it gets printed. Strategic advantage. And if you give some feedback and advice, maybe you get to write the foreword or a quote on the backside. Then you piggyback on their success, and then suddenly you're famous. If you keep doing this for years, suddenly you're in the zone, because you have access to more than 60 writers. And if you help them all, because it's easy. If you talk to 10 writers here, they will tell you a lot of things that they maybe don't know. So suddenly you're the intermediary, and you get an information position, and you have strategic insights, and a lot of books for free. This also works. Make sense? Okay. So, I never worked in an organization, and I think we are about to see the beginning of the end of organization, because organization doesn't really make sense anymore. It's good to hear this in advance, so you can turn your career before everything goes sideways. Who of you has been reading into this 4th industrial revolution and disruption in your markets and stuff like that? Yeah. Well, forget about it. There is no 4th industrial revolution. This is the beginning of the end of industries. and there will be no new industries. So this is a mankind level of revolution that everybody on the planet will benefit from, but we get a systemic a crisis with all the companies who still think in terms of money and paper. So I have to elaborate on that, and then you find out why you really have to invest to unlock your true potential, so you can get out before everything goes sideways. We started to organize things in a hierarchy structure from the time of, I think, the Industrial Revolution. The entire payment system that we still use nowadays, changing time for money, like salary, is based on working with your hands. So people worked with their hands, and they would be paid per production. And somewhere in the 1900s, they said, oh, that's not fair, we have to pay everybody the same amount, and then we got salary. But it's based on working with your hands. But now, slowly, we are discovering that we don't work with their hands anymore, but with our brains. Works totally different than working with your hands. So we have to adjust the payment systems as well. And now, suddenly, we see that the structures that we used to work with don't really work anymore. Because, well, you see a lot of small startups not playing by the rules, using free technology or very cheap technology to move faster, smarter, because they did have time to read all the books. And suddenly they figure out how to do business without money. Oh my God, how does that work? So we're slowly moving away, but the tempo increases, from the traditional hierarchy organization to network organizations. But after network organization, we will work in networks. But what comes after networks? And I've been studying this for years, and I think it's swarms of people. And technology is the enabler of that. So you see that Wikipedia is a swarm of a few 100,000 people cooperating, very smart, very inefficient, very effective, like ants, and doing stuff without direct financial gain. And if everybody adds a little bit to the puzzle will be solved faster. So the guys of the Encyclopedia Britannica had no idea what happened to them when they heard about a competitor that didn't have a business model. How do you compete with guys who don't have a business model? So we have to figure out what it means to work in swarms and how to apply technology in a smart way. I wrote a book about it, like 10 years ago. The book was called Easycracy in Dutch. It's an exploration of the next step in the evolution of bureaucracies. And I'm very sure that the most things that people are really fed up with in nowadays organization is bureaucracy. And I think healthcare, education are essentially bureaucratic problems, because the solutions are there, the people are there, the information are there, the passion is there, the need is there, technology is there, and in between we have bureaucracy. And I'm not against bureaucracy, because I see the purpose of bureaucracy. But I don't know who was here with the last lecture, but well, you have corruption, of course. And in the bureaucracy, you have this hidden elite force that nobody knows, but they are experts in sabotage and slowing things down, stopping you from innovating. And they use two tools to slow things down. And one of those tools is called money, also known as budget. And the other one is called paper, digital or physical. So maybe you have experienced, you have a great idea, and you tell it in the organization, and then somebody says to you, most of the time your boss, oh great, can you put it on paper? In my parallel universe, it's a red flag. It's a sign that you have to get away fast and run to the other side. Because if you need a lot of budget, you have to create a lot of paper, and then they want to talk about it. It's called meetings. And before you know, you create more paper, you do more assumptions that you don't test, and before you know, half a year later, your boss is gone, there's a reorganization, or the budget is gone. This is true for a lot of knowledge workers. Is there another way? Well, 15 years ago, there was no other way, almost not. But now we have technology, and suddenly you can change the dynamics of the game. So we call this elite force, in Dutch, we call them the Hindermacht, the hinder force. And we developed a game called How to Hinder the Hinder Force. And technology is the enabler. A lot of people saw social media in its beginning, like Twitter, as, wow, social media, Twitter, well, that's bullshit. I mean, yeah, why would I go to Twitter? Why do I want to know if somebody goes to the toilet? And that makes sense. That's not really important. But it became a big thing. But what I saw at that moment, that beyond the horizon there was something else going on. It was the beginning of the end of organizations, because you cannot only use social media to communicate and to broadcast, but it's leveraging your scarce resource on this planet big time. So you don't longer need organizations to organize something, to set things in motion. And last half year in the Netherlands, sorry for the Dutch example, something spectacular happened. Is there anybody here in the room member of a union? A labor union, something like that? You have that here? Yeah, you think you. But you're not a member, okay. Well, so we have unions as well, and they're like all bureaucratic dinosaur systems, and they have to look after the people who are less powerful in all kinds of work relations, but they don't do their work very well. And there were 3 teachers at a primary school, and they figured out, and they were members of the union, and they figured out that they get less salary than the people in high school, and they said, oh, that's not fair, we have to do something about it. And they were, for their entire life, members of the union. So they wrote the union, or they called them, and nothing happened because they were old bureaucratic dinosaurs. And then they thought, oh, wait a minute. Then they went to Facebook. And maybe not everybody is aware of it, but in Facebook you can create groups. It's free. It's kind of free. You don't get a bill. But your privacy is gone, but that's another discussion. And there are 3 types of groups on Facebook. There are public groups that are not interesting here in this example. You have secret groups, but you cannot find them because they're secret. And a closed group. And it works like this. It only takes you 2 minutes. You just click on it. You don't need money or paperwork, whatever. You do a click, click, and then you have a group. And then you knock on the door. And then if they open up and you behave nicely, you get to stay. Otherwise, they kick you out. That's the concept of a closed group. So those 3 teachers, without having any meeting, without needing any budget, created this group and told the other teachers in our country, well, we have a group. And then suddenly 45,000 other teachers, I think that's a lot, were in the group within a month. And then they were talking to each other. Oh, are you also a member of the union? Yeah. And are you also upset? Yeah, we're also upset. Yeah, we need more money. Yeah, that's not fair. Okay, let's strike. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's strike. Yeah, on that date, no, I can't make it that date. Okay, this date. Yeah, everybody agreed. And then something spectacular happened. They said, we're going to strike. And then the unions and the government, you heard about it and said, oh, wait a minute. You cannot do that. And then they said, why not? And they strike. They went to strike. And within a month, they got 700 million euros from the government. Because, well, we found out that we actually need the schools as a sophisticated way of daycare. Otherwise, the system would collapse. But suddenly, the union found out that they were outplayed by 3 teachers using technology in an easycratic, smart way. But also the Dutch police force is figuring this out. Also the people in healthcare are figuring this out. We don't longer need, per se, organizations to organize stuff without the use of money and paper. And you cannot sabotage this process because there's no money involved and there's no paper. So you cannot talk about it because there's no evidence at all. They're just doing it. So let's talk about the very nearby future and the end of markets. Hi. I think technology in a lot of fields is eradicating friction. That's basically what technology does. It creates less friction. And I think markets can only exist as long as you have friction between supply and demand. And you're also able to capitalize on that. And if you cannot capitalize on it anymore, like the record stores, well, your business is gone. That's okay, we now have Spotify. Governments and institutions are not in the supply and demand friction business, but in the solution and problem business. And as long as there is friction between the solution and the problem, then you're legitimate to be an organization. But what we see now is rapidly technology is evolving so fast, becoming so cheap, that they're taking out friction in government, in institutions, and also in businesses. So I think we have to really rethink what actually is work. How can we be effective, not efficient, but effective? How can we do things without money on a big scale? How can we use intrinsic motivated people to create something? And how can we find the optimists? Because I'm manically optimistic. It's better for your health. And I deal with a lot of skeptical people. And I love skeptical people. So if you know anybody who's skeptic, give them a big hug, because we have to be very nice to them, because skeptic people are very experts in preventing problems. That's always a good idea. But there's one thing that a pessimist or a skeptic cannot do, and that is actually solve a problem. Because therefore you need an optimist who think, well, I think there's a way. And this is how we traveled into space, this is how we created cars. You always need an optimist. Guess what? In the upcoming 4 years, we get 4 to 5 billion new minds on the web at gigabandwidth speed when it comes to the internet. And they will come up with a solution that we never thought of, because that's happening all the time. 30 years ago, if somebody came up with a solution, it would take like 10, 15 years before even other people figured it out and fiddled with it. But now, we see that if something happens on the planet and somebody comes up with a solution, it will take maybe a few days for other people to adapt to it, to benefit from it, and to build something on it. It's why blockchain is going so fast and stuff like that. So I think we have to prepare ourselves to this speed of innovation that we never saw before in the history of mankind. And if you only keep looking to these developments from an economical perspective and not from a mankind level of perspective, I think you might get in trouble. Who of you here in the audience is saving money for their pensions? And who of those people actually really believes that by the time that you get to go with pension, that the money is still there? I ask this question 50,000 people a year. Few people even believe in this concept of pensions, and yet we still use this system, paying money, investing this money in companies where, and I think, well, maybe they're gone in 10 or 15 years. So those are exciting times, I think. So the only solution you have to deal with this is built on your optimism, your altruistic skills, building your social capital, and work on your resilience. But if you want to work on your resilience, you have to open up your mind. You have to create a bigger world for yourself, so you need new language, new concepts, new ideas. And they're out there. And you are being outnumbered by people who have more time than you because they don't use Outlook, Microsoft Word, Sheets, and PowerPoints. I think 10 years ago, I quit using Microsoft Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, Excel, also the online variants. And at any given moment, I'm running 50 projects at the same time. But I don't do meetings and I don't put anything on paper. That's a radical different approach. But can you imagine how much time you can save if you quit using all those tools and you figure out what is the essence of what I want to achieve and how can I get there faster, smarter, cheaper, better? And it's not about me, but now we live in an age that millions of people are figuring this out beyond the boundaries of organizations. And they're teaching each other at TED Talk, stuff like this. But most of you don't have time to watch those TED Talks. So I see a lot of friction going on between the people in organizations and outside of organizations. In organizations, we tend to use a lot of money for stuff that we could easily get for free from a part of our customers, but we don't know the customer because we forgot to invest real attention and time in it. I can talk about stuff like this for 6 hours without anybody falling asleep. And I'm a master of monologue, as you found out. But I prefer dialogue. So let's have a discussion or a debate about those topics. Is there anybody here with comments, questions, whatever, to make this more vivid? Because you're pretty stable.
Hi, the name is Tianus Bosch. I'm a confused accountant in an IT environment.
There are a lot of them.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
So, you were talking about retirement and whether your money is going to be there or not. Now, I have that in the next sort of 5 to 6 years lying ahead. But they're also talking about re-engineering yourself in terms of what the workforce is going to look like in 10 to 15 years' time. So in my case, retirement is really just, it's just sort of a vision, but it's not that I'm going to stop working. How do you see the workforce changing in the next 10 to years, and how do I need to re-engineer myself in those particular spheres?
Well, everything starts with awareness. And now you're aware because you cannot unhear something. We have no idea what kind of workforce we need in 10, 15 years. I saw in Business Report this morning in the newspaper a big meetup of the BRIC countries talking about, okay, what kind of skills does the workforce of tomorrow actually need? Well, fact is, we don't know. We have no clue at all how the workforce of tomorrow will be. But, as I told this morning to all the HR people, because they should be in charge of stuff like this, I have some tiny ideas. Actually, I've been a recruiter for the past 20 years. I don't recruit for jobs. Let's make that clear. I try to recruit people for awesome stuff. And you don't get paid. So if you're in need of money, don't go to me. In all the projects that I do, I use this phrase that I heard 20 years ago. Hire for attitude, train for skills. Don't waste money on diplomas. Don't waste money on education while you get it for free. Attitude is more important than skills or knowledge. Hire for attitude, train for skills. If people are not too stupid and they have the right attitude, you can teach them anything. So I've been diving into this. But I found 6 aspects in attitude of people that can make a difference. And I think if you can focus on that and you develop them yourself amongst those 6 lines, you will be fit for the future. Because I think that's the origin of your question. So I work with people who are fast forward thinkers, above average. Why? Otherwise I have to explain myself too often. So working with fast forward thinkers is a good idea. The second aspect that I focus on is flexible people. Because if they're not flexible, they get confused when things change. And that's the pattern. Things will change faster than ever, so you need flexible people. Then you need open-minded people. Otherwise, they cannot get their heads around new concepts. They have to be very curious. Otherwise, if you see them, don't see them for a while, they discover new stuff, and then you know more altogether. They have to be gutsy, daring, not in a macho, testosterone way. But I think what is daring is that you test all the assumptions that you based your fears on. Most of your fears are untested assumptions. And if you have people who are daring to test it, they learn faster. And the most important aspect that I focus on is love. People need to be kind-hearted. Because being kind-hearted gets you everywhere. It's your social capital. And social capital will get you also monetary capital, but in most of the cases, social capital is way more powerful than monetary capital. And I really think that the politicians of the country have a great lack of social capital. This is why they're trying to gather monetary capital. If you put it upside down, slow thinkers, inflexible, narrow-minded, blasé, frightened, and stupid people, you're too quiet now. So if you want to improve yourself, and this is why you're all here, I guess, you should figure out, okay, how can I work on my flexibility? How can I do stuff out of the box? Do things that I've never done before, like being on stage? Who of you has ever been on stage on your own? It's frightening, isn't it? It's one of the top 5 things that people are afraid of. You shouldn't. We don't climb on stage on our own without weapons, unarmed, against a big group with people with perhaps another opinion, because we learned from the evolution that that's not a good idea. Most of the people who tried this for the past 10,000 years were killed. And if you're dead, you cannot make kids anymore. So we are genetically engineered not to do this. But for the past 10 years, if you're not in the world of politics, it's pretty safe out there. When the first time that I climbed on stage, my first talk, 700 people, I woke up outside. So I was somewhere, and within 5 minutes, I was somewhere else. And in between, I have no idea. I fainted. On stage. They never told me that it was scary. I had no idea. But I woke up. And then I thought, I could have thought, this is not a good idea. And I thought, how big are the odds that this will happen again? And guess what? I told you some guerrilla tips about getting in touch with people who write books. But the master skill that you have to learn and that you have to face your fears with, climb on stage, train, practice. You never have to go to any network meeting again, because right now everybody's looking at me. So you don't have to go to network meetings. And then you can test your stories and you get feedback from the stories and you can improve every time again. And it gets you to places normally that are inaccessible. There was this guy, for all the youngsters here in the room, a friend of mine, Omar Kabiri. Omar Kabiri was, I think, 19 years old. And it was like, I think, 10 years ago. He was in Amsterdam, in a room with 1,000 students. And he attended a lecture of Sir Richard Branson, the CEO, the hippie entrepreneur from Virgin. You must have heard about it. And he got to ask a question to Richard via SMS and text messages. So there was a big wall and all the students could ask questions. But the number one question you should have asked, like Omar did, was, "Hi Richard, you just told us that you were going with your own plane to Mr. Barack Obama, the inauguration. Can we join you in your plane?" And Richard immediately saw the essence of the question and the fun of it and the boldness. And he said, "Yes, of course, but you have to bring your own passport." So Omar went out of the room to his house on the bike, through the canals in Amsterdam, went to his house, got his passport, got back in the van together with Richard. Hep, bam, they were in the plane. The plane went up and down again to London because his wife also wanted to go to Obama, the wife of Richard. And this guy's pretty well connected. They flew to Washington. They had a good time, free drinks on board. And then by the time they arrived, the team of Richard arranged a great staying in one of the great hotels and a flight back. But then the story started. Omar was invited to tell and share this story on stage for a room of entrepreneurs. And they gave him €1,000. And then he was asked again and became better. And within 3 years, a student with no experience at all suddenly was a prolific, enthusiastic, very well experienced public speaker, making €2,000–3,000 an hour with public speaking. And after 3 years, he had the mobile phone number of the Prime Minister. Because if you go to a lot of conferences as a speaker, you get to meet the other speakers and the people who organize it. So it's the best network move that you can make. So I create a link for you, especially for you. So if you go to martijnaslander.international and you type in /Indaba, you get a list of books that I really think you should read or try to get in touch with the writer. Thank you for your time and see you at the drinks. Thank you.